I used to hitchhike when I was younger. This was back in the 90s, and I would hitchhike many places. I did it all over the country, and it was a cheap way to travel. Looking back, it was also a pretty dangerous way to travel, and I can't believe that I even did it as much as I did. Well, I'm going to tell you the story of what made me stop hitchhiking. I was going to go to California to visit some friends. I had already made it more than halfway there, but still had a ways to go. Somebody had just given me a ride to a city that I don't even remember exactly where it was, but I spent a couple of hours there and then was going to try to catch another ride. I stood near a major highway but next to a road leading to it. Then I waited for somebody to stop. Eventually, this white van pulled over. The man driving told me that he could drive me. I told him where I was going, and he actually said that he was also going to California. I felt extremely lucky at that point. So I got inside of his van, and he told me that I could sit in the back. The man had long hair, and I remember a mustache. It was great to get a ride from him because there was lots of space in the back of his van. After he started driving, we talked briefly, but not much. Soon, though, I got tired. I had been up since very early in the morning, and eventually I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I've always been a pretty deep sleeper. Anyways, the next thing I knew, I woke up and the van was stopped. I sat up and looked around. It was still nighttime. The man was no longer driving and wasn't inside at all. I seemed to be the only person in the van. I looked out of the windows of the van to see where we were. It was parked in the driveway of a random house. But when I looked to the house, standing at the front door was the man who had been driving. I saw him talking to someone. Then the front door opened and several men exited the house. They all started walking in my direction. I just had a terrible feeling about it. I quietly went for the side door. I opened it up and I got out. Then I quickly ran down to the end of the driveway and into the next yard. I went down the street until I got to a random nearby house that seemed far enough away. I walked up and knocked on the door. I'm not even sure what time it was, but I got very lucky when the door opened up. When the person opened the door, I asked them to call the police, and thankfully they did. I explained to them what was going on, and I waited there on their front step. I did not see the men coming after me or anything. However, I did see the white van driving off down the road just a minute later. When the cops got there, everybody was gone. I got a ride to a nearby bus stop and then used public transportation for the rest of my trip. This happened back in 1996. I was driving home from work one night. It was kind of late at night, and I lived in a house that was roughly 20 minutes away. So I remember that after leaving work, I was driving down the road and this car came up behind me. It was still pretty early on in the drive, however. I didn't suspect the car to be following me until maybe 5 minutes after this when I turned 2 more times. The car remained with me. I'm not sure when this car started following me, if it was right when I left work or afterwards. However, I did not recognize the vehicle, and I didn't know who this could be. None of my coworkers lived by my house. This car was a white sedan, and it just looked pretty average for the most part. I really couldn't tell who was driving. I kept going back home, and I just hoped that the car would stop following me at some point. At first, I was thinking that this had to be a mistake. Maybe the driver of the car thought that I was somebody else, or maybe there was a chance that they weren't actually following me. By the time I had made it to my street, though, the car was still there. And my street was generally pretty quiet. So when I got there, I really didn't know what else to do. So I drove to my house. My plan was to go into the driveway and then go inside and hope that nobody chased after me or anything. But when I reached my house, before going in the driveway, I slowed down significantly. When I did, the car behind me got right up really close. It became pretty obvious that they were likely going to pull into my driveway after me. So then I just stopped in the road. I didn't think that it would be a good idea to go into my driveway anymore. As soon as my car stopped, I saw in my rearview mirror multiple doors to the car behind me opening. It looked to be just about every door except for the driver's. 3 men then got out of the car and all of them at once started walking in my direction. As soon as I saw this, my instant reaction was to drive away. I hit the gas and started moving. The men were able to just about reach my car, but then they stopped when I was moving away fast enough. After that, the car behind me started to move forward towards me, but then it quickly stopped. Then the men raced over and started getting back inside of the car. I tried to use this to my advantage and drive as quickly as I could to the end of the street. By the time I reached the end, though, the car was catching back up with me, and because there was really nobody else out on the road, it would be difficult to lose this guy. So I knew that I couldn't go back to my house at this point, and I decided to just drive around. I really didn't know what to do or where to go. It was late at night, and all of my family and friends were probably asleep. And remember, this was '96, so I didn't have a cell phone. So I went back out onto another road with this car right behind me. I was able to soon get onto a nearby, busier road, but there was still nobody else out driving. The car with at least 4 men in it was staying right behind me. I drove down this road for probably another 10 minutes. Then I saw something that caught my eye. There was a gas station up ahead that appeared to be open. And not only that, but there were what looked like 2 cars getting gas. I knew that I had to go there, and I pulled off the road. And then there was a quieter one before the gas station. The car behind me followed onto the quieter road, but when I pulled into the gas station, the car behind me did not. I went right behind another car that was getting gas. Then I got out and looked around for where the car that had been following me went. I saw that the car turned its lights off and was parked on the side of the quiet road that the gas station was on. I realized that they were probably waiting for me to leave. I was happy to see that none of them were getting out of the car, though. So I went inside of the gas station. Then I went to the employee behind the counter and I asked them to call the police. After that, I waited inside for them to arrive. But sometime between when I went inside the gas station to when the police got there, the car left. It was maybe 5 to 10 minutes of a wait. When they got there, though, I went outside and saw that the car was gone. I told the police what had happened. There wasn't much that could be done, though. After the police left, I was able to drive back home and luckily didn't see the car again. I've always wondered why those guys were following me. I didn't recognize any of them, and I don't know what they could have possibly wanted. I'm really glad that they didn't catch me, though. This happened back in the year 1996. I was 13, and one night I was at home with my older sister, who was 16 at the time. I remember that our parents were gone for the night, so they gave us some money to order a pizza. After our parents left, I went into my room to play video games, and my sister was in her bedroom. When I got hungry, I left my room, and I told my sister that I wanted pizza then. So we ordered, and I'm not sure what time it was, but it was dark out. While we waited for the pizza, we hung out in the living room. Then I remembered that the pizza guy got there. After he rang the doorbell, my sister went over and answered and paid the guy. She then brought the pizza into the kitchen. I was still in the living room watching TV, but I was about to go into the kitchen. As I got up, I heard somebody suddenly trying to open the front door to our house. I stopped where I was and listened. They tried opening the door again. I wasn't sure if it was the pizza guy or what. I went over to the front window and looked out of it.
Moving away. They went out of sight within a second, though, and I really didn't see anything. It was just enough to know that somebody was there. The person had gone to the side towards the driveway, but also towards the side of our house. I kept watching, but I did not see them return. I figured they had left. So I then went into the kitchen, and I remember that I told my sister about it. We looked out of a few windows but didn't see anything, and figured that the guy had left. So we went into the living room and were having pizza and watching some TV. But not long into this, and then there was a knock at the front door. We carefully went over to a front window and looked out of it. When we did, we saw that there was this guy standing there on the front step. It was not the pizza delivery guy from earlier. Neither of us recognized him, and we figured that it was the same guy who had tried entering the house. We didn't know what we should do. I wanted to call our parents, but they didn't have cell phones at the time. So we stayed in the living room and heard the guy knock once more. Then he stopped. Things were very quiet for a short time. We looked out again, and the guy was now gone and we couldn't see him. However, just moments later, we heard somebody try opening the back door to the house. Whoever this guy was, he seemed to be determined to get into our house for some reason. My sister said she was calling the police and then went over to the home phone. I stayed in the living room and hoped that the man would not try to break in. While my sister was on the phone, I didn't hear anything more. After she was told that the police were on their way, we looked out of a few more windows. We did not see the guy in the backyard or the front yard. Probably 10 minutes later, the police got there. We figured that the guy had left. I remember just hoping that he wouldn't return after the police had went away. My sister mostly talked to the police and said what happened. I also talked to them a little bit too and gave my accounts. They said they would look around our property, and surprisingly, the police found a man hiding behind a tree in our backyard. It was the same guy. I really couldn't believe that he was still there. The police arrested the guy for trespassing, Neither me or my sister had any idea who he was. I'm really glad that they found him. This is a very scary experience that I had back when I was a kid. I was 9 years old, and this happened back in 1999. I'm an only child, and I lived with my mom and dad. I was also homeschooled growing up, and my mom would teach me. She also worked as a piano instructor out of our house. On this day in particular, though, it was just her and I at home. She was teaching me something. I don't remember what subject, but we were at the table in the living room. It was probably sometime in the morning, and out of nowhere we heard glass breaking. It sounded like one of the bedroom windows was being smashed. It was a ways away, but we both knew that somebody was likely breaking in. I remember that my mom grabbed me and she took me to the end of the living room and into the office. There was a little office space that my parents used with a desk and bookshelves in there. We closed the door and locked it. Then my mom dialed 911. We heard somebody walking in the house and they soon entered the living room. My mom spoke with the police briefly. I remember her telling them that there was a break-in. I was really scared and had no clue what was going on. I kept asking my mom what was happening, and she was just saying that I should be quiet and try to stay calm. We went underneath the desk in the office and hid there. The footsteps could be heard walking throughout the house, and then they went closer and closer to us. Soon, they went right outside of the office door. That's when things got real. We were both as silent as we could be. The person then tried opening up the door, which was locked. They tried several more times and then knocked on it calmly. We stayed where we were and didn't move a muscle. Then my mom spoke. She yelled loudly that the police were on the way. At first, we heard nothing. Then there was the sound of a man with a deep voice laughing. It was one of the creepiest laughs that I've ever heard. I was so confused and didn't know why he would laugh. Then he started walking away. We heard the footsteps moving farther throughout the house. We were glad that he went away and didn't know what he was doing. Was he going to the rest of the house to steal stuff, or was he going to get some object and try to break the door down? I didn't know. After he walked away, though, we heard what sounded like the back door opening. Maybe he was leaving. Things got really quiet after that, but we still didn't dare leave the office. We didn't even move out from underneath the desk. Not until about 5 or so minutes later when the police arrived. Then only when the police were knocking at the door did we finally get up. We let them in and they searched the entire house and property. Unfortunately, the man was never found. He had smashed the window to my bedroom, which was really scary. Nothing in the entire house was stolen, though. After that, my dad came home from work early and we all talked to police officers for a while. My window was replaced the next day. The good part is that the person never came back. However, we never saw who he was, and I still don't know. For a little bit of background, this happened to me in the 1990s. During this time, I was a single female living by myself in a house. I worked a job that was in an office downtown. The company that I worked for back then was very large and had different offices in the city and around the country. One time there was a big work party that was taking place at a hotel downtown. It was a pretty big deal and hundreds of people from multiple offices were invited. When I was there, the first few hours of it were good. I was mingling with other coworkers and some of my friends from work. Towards the end of the night, though, I was planning on leaving soon and a man approached me. I was standing off kind of to the side a little bit and he walked right up and introduced himself. I had seen him earlier at the party, but I didn't recognize him and he must have worked at another office. I don't remember what his name was, but he was clearly interested in me. But something about him did not sit right with me. He just seemed a little bit strange, and I was also not interested in him. We talked for a little bit, just basic conversation. He told me that he worked at another location and asked me how I liked my job and stuff. So at the end of the conversation, I said that I was planning on heading out. He asked me if I wanted to share a cab, and I told him no thanks and that I drove there. At that point, he asked me for my number before I left. This is something really stupid looking back, but back then when some guys would ask me for my number and I wasn't interested, I would give them a wrong number. It was much easier to do back then because not everyone had cell phones. I did have a cell phone, but I rarely used it. I would mostly just use my home phone because my cell phone was big and bulky. So I gave this guy a random wrong number. Then I shook his hand and walked away. After that, I stayed at the party for only 5 more minutes or so. I said bye to some of my work friends and then I headed out. I left the hotel and went to my car parked on the street. Then I drove home. I lived only about 10 minutes away and my house was right outside the city. The neighborhood was very busy and the houses were really close together. I went inside and only about a minute later there was a knock at my front door. By now it was almost 11 at night, so I knew this was really strange. I walked over to the door and answered it without even checking to see who was there. When I opened up the door, I saw the guy from the party. It was a shock to see him here. I asked him what he was doing, and he seemed pretty angry. He told me that he called my number and it belonged to a random guy who had no idea who I was. Then he said that he knew I gave him the wrong number and asked me why I did it. There wasn't much I could say. I just told him I wasn't interested, but that doesn't mean he could follow me home. He said a few more angry things to me and then started up towards my door. It looked like he was going to try to come inside of my house, and I quickly slammed the door shut. He caught it.
Right before it closed, though, and tried to stop me. I had to practically throw my whole body up against the door to get it to shut. I was finally able to, and then I locked it. He tried opening the door several times and then started pounding on it. I yelled at him that I was going to call the police. At first, he kept banging on my door. I didn't think anything was going to stop him, and I went over to the phone. But finally, he stopped and then walked away. I watched him leave, and after that night, I never saw him again. I was worried that he would show up randomly sometime or something like that, but he didn't. This was the last time that I ever gave anybody the wrong number. This story happened back in 1999. When I was a kid, I used to love going to McDonald's. It was probably my favorite restaurant, and I loved getting the Happy Meals. They would come with a toy, and I thought that was really cool. So back during this time period, I was 7 years old, and I remember that I was hanging out with my cousins and sister one day. We were at my uncle's house, which was actually on the same street as my parents' house. It was cool to live close by, and we would hang out a lot. At the time, my sister was 9 years old, and my cousins were aged 5, 10, and the oldest was 14. The 14-year-old was a girl named Jane, and she would babysit all of us a lot back then. So I remember that us kids wanted to go to McDonald's. Jane was supposed to take us there, but we lived close enough to walk. It was just outside of our neighborhood and probably less than a mile away. So all of us kids left my uncle's house and started walking there. I don't really recall much about the walk there, but when we arrived at the McDonald's, we went in and got Happy Meals. Then we went to the area in the back that had the play place and started hanging out there. Us kids were going through the jungle gym tunnels and down the slides and stuff in the play place. As you know, the play place would be at the back side of the restaurant in like another room back then. Then there were a few tables in that area and many more tables in the regular dining room part of the McDonald's. From what I remember, there were not too many people at the McDonald's that day. But as us kids were in the play place, there were a few other kids that joined in who I didn't know. I think it was 2 or 3 of them. After playing for a long time, I remember also noticing that there was a woman sitting in a chair in the play place room, sort of watching us. I assumed that she was a parent of one of the kids who I didn't know. The lady was the only adult in that room, and my cousin Jane was sitting in the other McDonald's dining room, not really watching us. So I remember that after a while, I went down one of the slides, and I was not that far away from the woman when I got to the bottom. She was looking at me, and I sort of had to walk by her. When I did, she said hi to me, and I stopped and said hi back to her. She called me over closer to her, and I was confused. I remember that she seemed friendly. The woman then asked me if I wanted to get some food. I was confused and said that I already did. She asked me if I wanted an ice cream sundae. I said, sure. Then what the woman said next made me very suspicious. She asked me to go out to her car really quick and get some coins with her to buy the ice cream. I already found it strange that she was talking with me in the first place. This just seemed really weird. I was young but not stupid. My parents had told me to never go in a stranger's car. I didn't really answer the woman. That's when she said, come on, and started to get up and sort of grab my hand. I just turned and ran away from her back to the jungle gym. At that point, all the other kids were playing inside of it. When I got back in, I went up and went through some tunnels until I saw my cousins. Then I went to a window in the tunnel and looked out. The woman was still sitting there and just watching us, sort of. I happened to run into one of the other kids in the play place. I asked him if that was his mom, and he said no. Then I asked the other kid, and she also said that was not her mom. so this woman was not a parent of anybody in the play place. I thought that was kind of weird. I didn't really want to leave and go near her again. However, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I remember looking out again, and the woman was not there. Not too long after this, my cousin Jane came into the playplace room and said that it was time for us to go. So at that point, all of us kids walked out to leave. As we were going through the main part of McDonald's, I saw the woman sitting by herself at a booth. We left the McDonald's then and started heading home. For the first part of the walk back, it was normal, but I would say about halfway, I remembered that this car drove down the road really slow past us. And when it did, I was sure that I saw the same woman was driving it. It went out of sight, but like a minute or two later, I saw it drive by again. And then a short time after that, when we were on the next road, which is quieter, it started driving slowly behind us. Jane had picked up on this as well, and I remember that she told us to walk faster. We did sort of, but with a bunch of kids that were young, it was probably hard. I remember that suddenly Jane told us to follow her. She had turned and started going into a random person's yard. We all followed her and went around the house and behind it. She must have known the neighborhood really well and knew where she was going, because the next thing I knew, we walked through like 2 or more people's yards and then we went back on our street. I had no idea where we were until I saw the street. Then we were able to make it back safely to my uncle's house. Jane made us all go inside, and I remember that she told her parents about the car following us. That's when I told her about the woman I saw. I'm not really sure what happened after that. I don't know if they called the police or if they called the McDonald's or anyone. I'm just really glad that I didn't agree to go with that woman. Looking back, it kind of gives me the creeps to think about it. This happened one sunny Saturday morning in 1993. I'm a female and was 13 years old at the time. I remember that my mom had to do some shopping and I went with her. It was just the two of us and we went to this strip mall that was fairly close to where we lived. The strip mall had several different stores in it, as well as restaurants. We went to a store where my mom was shopping and I found it pretty boring. There was also a Blockbuster store that was right next door, which was always interesting. So I told my mom that I was going to go next door to Blockbuster and look around. My mom said it was fine, and when she was done, she would come and let me know. So I left the store and then walked into the Blockbuster. When I got inside, I started to walk around and look at the movies. Within being inside of the store for maybe 5 minutes, I remember noticing this man kind of staring at me. He was standing at the end of the aisle, and I saw him out of my corner of eye. I couldn't tell at first, so I looked over. The guy was just kind of staring at me. I didn't know him or anything. I stayed there for about a minute or so, and so did the man. Him just standing there, though, and seemingly looking at me was getting uncomfortable. So I walked away. I went to another aisle to look at stuff. Before long, though, I noticed the man slowly walk into that aisle as well. After that, I started to walk around the store. Wherever I went, it didn't take long before the man would show up. I was not sure where he had come from or what, but I decided to leave the Blockbuster and go back to the store that my mom was in. I walked out and then went to the store next door and went inside. I found my mom, and I did not tell her about the creepy guy. For the next few minutes, I just shopped with her. Then I noticed the man was now inside of this store. He was not following me around, but was kind of standing at the complete opposite other side. He was looking in my direction, though. At this point, I was very weirded out by his behavior. I didn't know if he was really trying to follow me around, but it sure seemed like it. I tried to just ignore it, though. I wasn't feeling in danger now that I was with my mom again. Still, I was very surprised that the man went in this store as well.
Then we left. We got into our car in the strip mall parking lot, which was not that large. It was basically just 2 long rows of parking spaces. After getting in the car, I noticed the man walking out to another car that was parked a ways down. I was sure to realize which car he entered. We started to leave, and then I noticed the man's car start to leave as well after us. This shocked me. After pulling out of the lot and the man doing the same thing, I told my mom about it. She noticed the car, and when she heard the guy had been following me around Blockbuster, she stopped and then made a U-turn. The guy behind us did as well.
My mom then went back into the parking lot of the strip mall and stopped the car. At first, the man did the same thing. My mom then got out of the car. She was angry and I guess wanted to confront the guy. However, after my mom got out, the guy backed up his car and then turned it around. He quickly drove away again, leaving the strip mall and going out of sight. After that, we were able to go home. I'm glad that I told my mom about the guy and he stopped following us. I'm not sure what would have happened if not. This is something that happened back in the 1990s when I was in high school. I used to hang out with my friends at our local mall all the time. The mall was very popular back then. One time I remember that we were going to this one new store that had just opened. It was some kind of clothing store that was having a big grand opening. I was with my friend Shauna at the time and we were waiting in line to get into the store. The store was already open, but they would only let a certain amount of people in at a time because there were so many people there. So as we stood in line for a while, I told Shauna that I was going to get a pretzel and would be right back. She would keep our place in line, and I recall that it seemed like it was going to be at least a 10-minute wait before we got into the store. I could see the pretzel shop just down the way, so I walked over there and got one. I was gone from Shauna for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I would say. Then I walked back over to her. When I arrived back, she told me that some guy had been following me. I had no idea. I asked her what she was talking about, and she pointed to a guy that was now sitting on a bench not too far away. She said that she saw me go to get the pretzel, and the man got in line behind me, but after I left, he left without ordering. She said that she could see him just staring at me and then following. When I got back in line with Shauna, though, obviously he couldn't, and he went and sat down on the bench. As she was telling me this, I saw the man look up at us and then quickly look back down away. I didn't know how I could have been so oblivious that I hadn't noticed him. We stayed in line and kind of kept an eye on the man as we waited. I was hoping he would walk away, but he didn't. He just kept sitting there, and here and there he would lock eyes with me for a second. The man had sort of stringy hair, like he was long and greasy, but he was also balding a little. He also had a goatee. After a while, we were finally led into the store. We made our way in and shopped. We were inside for probably like 15 minutes, and I remember that we each got some stuff. As we were inside the store shopping, I forgot all about the man. Eventually we left. When we did, though, I saw the man still sitting there on the bench in the same spot, and I remembered him. And now we started to walk away. And when we started to walk away, I noticed the man getting up. Shauna and I walked to the right, and we saw that the man was starting to walk after us. This is where our instincts really kicked in. We both just started running. We sprinted through the mall with some people probably thinking that we were crazy, but the man did not sprint after us. I think he realized how crazy suspicious that would look. We ran and ran until we got to the exits. Then we left and drove home. We never saw that man again after that. I'm really glad that we didn't, because we hung out at the mall many more times. Maybe the man had seen us before, or maybe that was his only time at that mall. I'm really not sure. But I'm glad that we did not stick around to see what he wanted. This is something that took place when I was a kid. I think it was the late 90s or maybe the very early 2000s. I'm not sure the exact year or exactly how old I was. If I had to guess, I was maybe 10 or 12, but I could be wrong. I just know that I remembered the details of this particular incident pretty well, and it's something that I will never forget. So I used to tag along with my mother when she went shopping all the time. She would go to Target probably the most, and I liked that store. They were set up nicely, and I enjoyed hanging out in the toy section when I was younger. Then, as I got a little bit older, I would go to the electronics or the video games. All those aisles were fairly close to each other, so when my mother shopped, I would hang out over there. She knew where I would be, and it was usually a pretty good time. One time we went to Target a little bit later at night than usual. The store was pretty quiet, but like normal, I went off to the electronics department, and my mother shopped somewhere else in the store. I remember that I was looking at the video games for a while, and then I went into another aisle that was one of the first aisles sort of off the electronics area. It was pretty close by, and they had all the television sets that were for sale playing not far away. Then there was another TV in this aisle that was not for sale, but hanging from the ceiling. It usually played advertisements like Target commercials or music videos or new movies that were out and whatnot. As I was in the aisle, I heard it playing like normal. I was looking at something on one of the shelves. Then I suddenly heard the sound from the TV turn into this weird screeching sound, and then some static. All of a sudden, I heard this creepy and eerie music. I looked over to the TV. No longer was it playing Target advertising, but now the screen was really dark. It just didn't seem right. After a few seconds, a man emerged onto the screen, but you could only sort of see his head. It was so dark that it was just the basic shape of the guy's head, and you couldn't make out any details. He started speaking, and it sounded like he was using a voice changer. I was frozen with fear, standing in the aisle all by myself. The guy started talking, almost rambling. I couldn't really tell what he was talking about. I was either too young to understand or too creeped out. And I really don't remember anymore. After standing there for like 30 seconds, I wanted to leave, but I was almost too scared to move. There was nobody else around in the immediate area at all. Finally, I came to my senses. The thing was still going, and I turned, and I'm sure I sprinted out of there as fast as I could. I literally ran through the store until I saw another shopper. Then I felt better, but I continued walking really fast until I found my mother. I told her about it, and I was really scared. My mom told me to show her, so we went back to the aisle, even though I really didn't want to from being so creeped out. When we got back there, though, the TV was just off. The other electronics were playing the normal advertisement stuff, but this TV was just off. My mother finished her shopping, and then we left. I was really freaked out, but after leaving the store felt better. Nothing like that ever happened again. To this day, I still wonder about it, though. Did somebody hack the TV thing at Target? I'm 100% sure that that was not some kind of advertisement. Maybe it was someone's idea of a prank? It still creeps me out, though. This happened almost 25 years ago, back when I was 17. My younger brother, who was 13 at the time, and I were driving through northern British Columbia, making a long road trip to my aunt's house. It was mid-November, and if you know the area, you know how dark it gets up there. The kind of darkness where it feels like there's nothing beyond your headlights. We were traveling through a place called Pine Pass. The road is so remote you can drive for hours without seeing another car, building, or gas station. I don't usually like driving in the dark, but poor planning had led us to leaving later than we had hoped. It was around 11 p.m. and I was exhausted from a long day of driving.
Plus the snow, which had started falling a while ago, and it was getting to a point where the road could be dangerous. My brother had already passed out in the passenger seat, so I decided to pull off at a small turnout by the side of the road. There was some tourist signage there, but nothing much else. I figured I'd take a quick nap before pushing on the rest of the way through the night. I locked the doors, reclined my seat, and closed my eyes. The next thing I remember, I was suddenly awake. I don't know what it was that snapped me out of my sleep, maybe a noise or a feeling, but I was wide awake and on alert. I looked out the windshield, but it was very dark and everything seemed quiet. Suddenly, I heard in unison all my door handles being yanked at. I could barely make out 4 or 5 men standing around my car, all pulling at the door handles, trying to get in. I don't know if they saw I was awake or not, but I panicked. I don't remember thinking clearly, just reacting. Without hesitation, I slammed the car into drive, and with one foot on the gas, I peeled out of there. I wasn't sure if I hit one of them or not, and honestly, I didn't care to check. I was too scared to stop. And hopefully, I ran over a foot or something of one of them. It was hard to tell in the snowy conditions, but I don't believe I was followed. I didn't stop until I got to my aunt's house, though, pushing through the rest of the drive. Looking back, I still don't know who those men were or what they wanted, but because of how isolated and dark that stretch of road is, I know they had to be bad people, and they likely traveled that road often. That part of the world is quiet, desolate, and isolated, and I never drove that road at night again. To this day, it remains one of the most terrifying moments of my life. This took place back when I was a kid. I believe that I was 10 years old or so. This was in the late 90s, and during this time, I would ride the bus home from school. It would drop me off at the corner not far from my house. Then I would walk a short distance on the sidewalk and go inside. We lived in a pretty standard neighborhood in the suburbs, and when I would arrive back home from school, both of my parents would still be gone at work. I had been trusted to be home by myself since I was 9 years old, and I didn't mind it. But in the afternoons, I would usually only be by myself for about 2 or 3 hours. I would just hang around the house and do homework or watch TV.
So one time I got home from school, like always. I was by myself, and it was maybe about 15 minutes or so after I got back home. I was in the living room, and there was a knock at the front door. I looked over, and from where I was, I could tell that somebody was there, but I couldn't see who they were. Back then, I was a shy kid, and I didn't want the person at the door to see me, so I ducked down. The person at the door then knocked again. I was curious, so I carefully moved to a window and looked out to see who it was. There was a man there, but I did not recognize him, and he was just standing at the front step. After knocking twice, the guy then tried opening the door, which was locked. Then he finally walked away. I thought that this was really weird. I watched him cut through the front yard and then go out of sight heading towards the sidewalk. It was very confusing why this guy would be here. I was thinking that he had to be at the wrong house or something. I really couldn't think of any other possible explanation, but after the guy left, I moved on and forgot about it. It was certainly strange and a bit creepy, but it didn't seem that bad to me. My parents ended up getting home later and everything was fine. But the very next day, I saw the man again. I remember that I rode the bus home and I got dropped off. Shortly after I stepped off the bus, I remember noticing the guy. He was a long ways away but walking down the sidewalk. I found it strange to see him here again, because until the previous day, I had never seen him before. I was not aware of him living in the area or anything like that. So I tried to hurry up, and I walked quickly to my house, then I unlocked the door and went inside. Once I was in, I felt safe, and I didn't really think that the man would do anything. But maybe 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door again. I looked and saw that the same guy was back. Obviously, I was not going to answer the door. I tried to stay hidden from the view of the man. This time, he only knocked once, and again, he tried opening the door. But after that, I saw him start to walk away. It was pretty much the same thing as the day before, and I saw him go out of my sight. This time, though, I was more creeped out because of the fact that he was here 2 days in a row. Plus, he saw me walk to the house, so there was no mistaking it. But for the next hour or so, nothing else strange happened. I was just hanging out in the living room. Then I decided to go out and water some of the flowers in the backyard. I went to the back of the house where the kitchen was, and then left out the back door. I took 2 steps into the backyard and saw the guy coming out from behind a bush. He was walking towards me. I ran back inside as fast as I could, and the man started running after me. I closed the door and locked it just in the nick of time. He nearly stopped me. He tried getting in but couldn't. I ran out of the room and went to the phone in the living room. I dialed 911 and asked for police to come to my address. The man ran away at that point, though. I was glad he was gone. The police got there a while later and searched the entire property as well as the neighborhood. However, the man was long gone by then. There was a bit of an investigation done. I don't really remember much else other than a neighbor about a block away remembered seeing a work van parked on the side of the road. They didn't know whose it was, and it was thought that maybe that was the guy's vehicle. After that, though, he never came back. I'm really glad that I was all right. I will never forget that scary experience.
Back in the late 90s, I dated this woman for a while. The relationship did not last long, and we broke up because we had many differences. She was actually the one to initiate the breakup, but I wasn't even that upset about it. Things had not been going well for a while from what I remember. So after breaking up, I remember finding out that she was dating a new guy, like less than a month later. I was sort of surprised by this, but I tried not to pay any attention to her anymore. At the time, I lived by myself in a sort of small house, a little ways outside of the city. One night, I was fast asleep when suddenly a noise woke me. I didn't know what it was at first, but I then realized that somebody was banging on my front door. I looked at the clock, and it was almost 2 a.m. I got up and walked out into the living room to go and see who was at my door at this hour. But the knocking stopped before I got there. When I looked out the window, I didn't see anybody at the door anymore. But then I saw what appeared to be my ex walking through the front yard.
I was very confused. She went out of my sight, and I did not think that she noticed me at the window. I kept looking, and I didn't see her for a while. So after that, I decided to go back to bed. I went back into my room, laid down, and closed my eyes. Before falling asleep, though, I heard another very loud noise. This time, though, it was the crashing of glass. It was so loud, and I will never forget it. I had no idea what was going on. This continued as if somebody was intentionally smashing my windows in the living room. Luckily, I had a telephone in my bedroom at the time, and I dialed 911. I reported what was going on, and I continued hearing the smashing for at least a minute straight. Then it finally stopped, and I heard my ex shouting from a distance, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. She soon stopped, though. I walked back out into the living room to find the window smashed and glass on the ground, but I didn't see anybody. The police got there a while later, and my ex was gone by then. I told them what happened. They later found my ex walking alone on a nearby street, and she was arrested. It turns out that she was very drunk and had been at a bar. Her friend was going to drive her home, but for some reason she asked to be dropped off at my place. That must have been when she banged on my door. Then she went and got a paver and broke the window out. At least when she did that, she did something to the house and not me. I was still very scared, though, because you never know what drunk people are going to do in that state of mind, and it was a very scary situation.
A long metal pipe type of object that was in my neighbor's yard. She used that to then smash my windows before leaving. I'm not sure why she did this other than from just being drunk, because we had been broken up for a while and she was dating somebody else already. I got my window replaced and moved on with my life. But I'll never forget that crazy experience. This is something that happened way back when I was a kid. It was sometime in the late 1990s, and I think I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. I remember that it was wintertime, and we got a bunch of snow in our city. There was a park just a couple of blocks away from our house, and we would go there all the time. My sister, who was 12 at the time, went with me to the park to go sledding. There's a pretty large hill that was perfect for sledding, and all the neighborhood kids would go there when it snowed. The park also had a small skating rink, and there was a woods that was next to and behind the hill. So we arrived at the sledding hill with our sleds. I remember that there was quite a few other people there, and it only got busier in the time that we were there. My sister and I went up and down the hill sledding many times, but it got harder and harder to do so with all the people in the way. There were so many kids as well as parents, and you could hardly slide down the hill without running into someone. I remember feeling frustrated by it. At one point, my sister was at the bottom of the hill, and I just made my way back up to the top. I don't really know what I was thinking looking back, but I went over to the other side at the top of the hill. I looked into the woods. There were lots of trees, but I saw a path. It was maybe a walking path during spring and summer months, but right now there was snow everywhere. I had the idea to slide down the hill on the path and into the woods. It was narrow, but my sled would have plenty of space. To me, it seemed better than how crowded the hill had become. So I took my sled and I set it up and started sliding down. I didn't think anyone else even noticed me going there. The slide down was good, just like the main spot for the hill. Towards the bottom, though, I nearly veered off and crashed into some trees. I was able to control my sled just enough not to, though. Then I remember that I slowed down and eventually came to a stop. By now, I was pretty much in the middle of the woods. But I walked back on the path up the hill and then slid down it again. The second time when I got to the bottom, I remembered that out of nowhere, I saw this guy come out of the woods. He appeared from behind me and to the left. I had no idea where he had come from, and I hadn't even noticed him. He was wearing a winter coat, snow pants, and winter hat. And then he walked to the front of my sled and grabbed the rope. Then he started pulling the sled with me on it. I was very confused. He was also pulling my sled farther into the woods. We went a little ways down before I decided I wanted to get off the sled. I remember asking the man to go back to the hill, but he completely ignored me. At that point, I just got off the sled while the guy was still pulling it. Then I started running as fast as I could down the path back towards the hill. At first, I heard the man stop and then turn around.
I thought he was going to chase after me, but he didn't. He must have just stayed there while I continued to run back. I soon got back to the top of the hill, and then I found my sister. She asked me where my sled was, and I told her what happened. We went back and saw that my sled was still on the path, but the man was nowhere in sight. We went and got the sled and then went back on top of the hill. Then we went home. Many years later, and I still remember that. I wonder if that man was trying to kidnap me, and I'm really glad that I got away from him. This is something that happened back in the late 90s. I was a teenager, and my friends and I used to hang out at our local mall all the time. It was what a lot of teens did back then. We would get out of school at like 3 p.m. or something, and then go to the mall until like 5 or 6 usually. We would also sometimes go there on the weekends. The stores were interesting and fun to shop at, and you could always hang out and chill at the food courts. For me personally, my parents were gone at work until like 5:30 or so I never had to be back right after school was done. I didn't go to the mall every day, but probably like 2 or 3 times a week on average. One time I was there with my friends Ryan, Emily, and Jose. I will also mention that I'm a female. So we got to the mall like any other day and walked around just talking and stuff. I don't know if people would agree with me or not, but mall stores were way cooler back then. I remember we just looked through a couple of stores, and then I think it was Jose who said that he had to be back early. My other friends, for some reason, also decided to go. I didn't want to go just yet, though. Normally, we hung out there longer, and I remembered that it was only like 4 o'clock. So I said bye to my friends, and I decided I would stay there for just a while longer. I went into another store and was shopping around, seeing if I wanted to actually buy something. At one point, a man came up to me and asked if I needed help with anything. I assumed that he worked there, and I said no thanks, I was just looking around. I stayed at the store for a while longer, but I did not end up buying anything. After I left the store, I was walking through the mall to see if I wanted to go to another place. When I was looking around, at one point I saw the man who had approached me in the store. I thought that he had worked there, like I said, so this kind of seemed weird to see him in the hallway. He was just sort of standing there. The guy had a slight beard, was kind of big, and had thinning hair. I turned and kept walking in the direction that I had been going. I went around a corner and didn't see any stores that I wanted to go in there. So I turned around. It just gave me the feeling that he was following me. At that point, whether he was or he wasn't, I decided that I would just leave. I headed for the nearest exit, which was down that walkway and to the right. So I walked over there and then left. And I had walked from school to the mall and would walk home as well because I lived close to both and did not have a car. So I started to go on the sidewalk along the parking lot. It was then that I heard somebody walking behind me. I turned and saw the same guy as before. Now I knew that he had to be following me for some reason. I walked faster and crossed a busy street and then was just a few blocks from our neighborhood. The man continued to follow me. The longer he was back there, the more nervous I became. When I started to reach our neighborhood, I just took off running. I sprinted down to the end of the street. Then I went around to the street behind us. I then hopped a fence going into our backyard and quickly went around to the front of the house. Then I got the key that was under the rug on our front step and went inside. I caught my breath and looked around. I didn't see the man anywhere, and I was pretty confident that I had lost him. For the rest of that day, I didn't see him at all. Well, a couple of days later, I think it was, my friends and I decided to go to the mall again after school. We were just walking around and hanging out like we usually did. I remembered, though, that we were standing around in this one area near the food court. I looked over and happened to notice the same guy again. He was sitting alone at a table in the food court, but didn't have any food. He was just sitting there looking at me. When I saw him, I told my friends about what happened the other day. We decided to walk away from the man. A while later, though, I glanced around and noticed the guy walking behind us. He was a ways back, but definitely trailing us. When I noticed that, I told my friends again. Ryan and Jose decided that they wanted to confront him. Emily and I told them not to, but it was too late. We didn't know if the guy was dangerous or something or what would happen. But Ryan and Jose both started walking right towards the guy, and they didn't seem to be afraid of him at all. But before they could reach him, the guy suddenly turned around and literally started speed walking out of there. Emily and I started to walk after them, but they quickly went out of our sight. About 5 minutes later, Ryan and Jose
turned. They said that they literally chased the guy out of the mall and he had left before they were able to catch up with him. So at that point, they turned around and went back. For the rest of the time that we were in the mall, we didn't see him. and I never saw him again after that either. I used to work as a substitute teacher for a little while. Now, this was back in 1996, so it was a while ago. But one event that took place is something that I will never forget. I was still pretty new to being a substitute at this time. One morning, I was asked to sub at a high school that I had never been to before. I think to this point, I had subbed at about 3 different schools, all in the same area. This one was in the same general area, but was much larger than the others, and I didn't know the layout at all going in. When I arrived to the school, I went inside and then checked in with somebody in the offices. They gave me the room number that I was subbing at and also gave me basic directions on how to get there. So I left the offices and headed for the classroom. Apparently, it was at the complete opposite end of the school. I remember passing by so many kids and it took a while to get there. About halfway there, I would say, I heard this bell ring. I knew that class didn't start yet, so I wasn't sure what exactly this bell was for. Then I heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. I didn't really hear it that well because the hallways were loud from all the students, plus the quality of the intercom back then was not what it is today, and it sounded like somebody was talking really close to the phone. I just remember hearing the words lockdown and not a drill. The other stuff I couldn't really make out. I think that they were saying that kids were supposed to go to their first period classes. So I tried to go faster and make it to the classroom that I was responsible for. The hallways very quickly became quiet, and soon I was the only person walking in them. I made it to my classroom probably 2 minutes or so later. Once I was there, I went inside of the classroom and saw that there wasn't a single student in the room. The classroom was empty, and I figured that all of the students had gone to other classrooms. Maybe they saw how there was no teacher in the room and went elsewhere. So, nevertheless, I got inside and then closed the door to the classroom. I locked it and then went and sat down at the desk. I didn't know why the school was locked down or where all the students went that were supposed to be in the classroom, so I just looked over the plans for the day for each class of what my instructions were. I hoped that the lockdown would not last very long and we could get things back to normal. After maybe 20 minutes or so, everything had been quiet to that point, but then I heard a knocking from my classroom. I got up, walked over to the door, and looked out of the window. There was what looked to be a male student standing at the other side of the door. I remember that he had dark hair, glasses, but was somewhat tall and strong-looking. I figured that he was a student that was supposed to be in the class that I was subbing for. I opened the door and let him come inside of my room. I asked him if he was in this class, and he said yes. Then he just walked over and sat down at a random desk. He told me that he was late and asked me if I knew what the lockdown was for. I said that I had no idea. Then we just sat there in silence for a little while. He was kind of just looking around casually. I remember asking him how the regular teacher ran things, and he just said that he's cool. Then we just sat there in more silence, waiting for the lockdown to be over. I remember that after a little while, I heard some footsteps going down the hallway. I didn't know who it could be. Then they passed by my classroom and kept going. It was awkward, and I wanted to make more conversation, so I looked around the desk and found the seating chart. I asked the student what his name was, and I looked at the class roster. The kid said nothing. It was strange because I didn't say it quietly or anything. I thought that he would have heard me. So I asked him again what his name was. This time, he looked up at me and then said that he had to go. He stood up and started walking over to the door. I told him that he wasn't allowed to. Obviously, in a lockdown, that's like the #1 rule. He didn't listen, though, and then he started running for the door. I started walking over him quickly, but he unlocked the door and then left. I mean, I'm not sure what I could have done. I'm not going to physically restrain the kid. I was guessing that he'd run into a hall monitor shortly after and get in trouble or something. But why did he run? I mean, I only asked him his name. That's when I thought maybe he wasn't actually in the class. And even worse, maybe he had something to do with the lockdown. I locked my door and then continued to wait inside of the classroom. Almost an entire hour went by until finally there was another announcement that the lockdown had ended. After that, the school day went on normal for the most part. Lots of students were talking about it, and I heard several different rumors, but for the rest of the day, there were no more lockdowns. By the following day, I had learned more about the true details. The kid that went to my class was, in fact, the cause of the lockdown. He had actually been expelled from the school, but had several friends that still went there. He was angry with one of the students for some reason and came to school before it started to beat him up. When a teacher tried breaking up the fight, he then assaulted the teacher. Then he ran away. He got lucky to find my classroom while others were looking for him. Because of the fact that I was a sub, I had no clue who he was. I'm not sure if he saw me earlier and knew I was subbing there, or if he just got really lucky. Either way, though, that's why he ran when I questioned his name. I would have seen that he's not actually in the class. I'm glad that he didn't try to fight me when I tried stopping him or something. I ended up being a substitute teacher at various schools for the rest of that year. Then I moved on to other things. I will never forget that crazy experience that I had that day. This isn't an overly scary moment, but just a really odd situation that happened to me back in about 1997. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, I worked doing trauma scene work. I was a supervisor of a crew that you never see or hear about, but what we did was go into homes, buildings, or structures after a homicide, suicide, accidental death or situation like that. Sometimes they were very gruesome, and sometimes it was as simple as removing a chair and cutting out the carpet. Oftentimes it involved a lot of cleaning and removal to sanitize the scene, both visually and biologically. Our goal was to leave the scene as void as possible. Like if you didn't know what happened there, you would just assume that it was under renovation. This one time, it was about midday, so not the usual middle-of-the-night cleanup after a bait body call. I don't know why the police and fire departments always waited until the night to call us out, but I would say 80% of the time that's how it happened. The day was a bright, sunny, not-so-warm day in a suburb of Los Angeles. I won't give the exact details of the location for privacy, and I don't think I even remember exactly what street it was on, but I do know that it was an older, yet very wealthy area of Los Angeles, the kind of neighborhood where you would expect doctors, business executives, or people in the entertainment industry to live in. As we pulled up to this home, it was a huge spread of mid-century modern with fancy landscaping and a long, curvy driveway. The place looked very well kept. The typical scenario was I, being the supervisor, would approach the door while my crew waited by the trucks. Since this was supposed to be a small job, we only had my vehicle and our service truck. I remember seeing an old fancy Mercedes and what looked like an old Porsche in the driveway. There were no other cars, but maybe there were some in the garage that I didn't see. As I walked up to the door, an older woman answered my knock. She was probably in her mid-50s, very well made up, with lots of jewelry on. None of the stuff she had on looked cheap, but none of it really was the style of the 90s either. I explained we were there for the cleanup.
Work, and I noticed that she had a drink in her hand, like a martini or something. Like I said, this was the middle of the day and probably before lunch. She led me into the house, and it was surprisingly dark and hazy, with cigarette smoke inside. Now, what happened next was really odd. The entire place looked like it was a time capsule from what I would call the Mad Men era. The house wasn't what gave me the creeps, but as she was leading me to like a second den area, we passed through the front room, another living room, and a bar and pool table area. Like I said, this house was huge. But there were a ton of people in the house, and the best way to describe them was that they all looked like characters from some early 1960s movie. There was a guy with a sport coat, glasses, and a boat captain's hat, a guy in a tuxedo, and a lady wearing a fur collar-long evening dress. The other people were all dressed in some weird collage of outfits. The amount of people all throughout the house didn't add up, as there were only 2 small cars in the driveway that would only fit 2 people. Where did all these fancy people come from? There was a low mumble of different conversations all around, with only an occasional glance at me as we were walking over to the scene. I remember one of those huge old cabinets with a record player playing old songs, and I felt like I was entering the Twilight Zone. We finally got to the room where the suicide happened. There was a red velvet chair where it had happened, and it wasn't a gunshot, but I assumed it was a razor to the wrists. The lady was standing in the entry of the room, and I was looking over to the scene. I told her that I would remove the carpet and remove and dispose of the chair that held most of the blood. She just nodded as she still had her drink in her hand. I asked her if she could sign the work order and release for disposal of personal property, meaning the chair. As she signed, she said, "When you and your crew are finished, just see yourselves out." I told her it probably wouldn't take us more than an hour. Then she turned and walked away back to her party. I made the journey back to the front door through the record-playing cigarette smoke and low-toned party conversations. I got out to my truck and my crew and told them that this one is creepy, and there was a party going on inside, and everyone is dressed up. I led my crew back to the room, and they started bagging up the chair and cutting out the old blue carpet. We never found out who committed suicide, but I assumed it was the lady's husband. As we were finishing up, I stayed behind in the room to take some final photos, as it was our protocol to take before and after photos. I thought about looking for the lady of the house just to let her know we were finished, even though I got the impression we were supposed to do what we needed to do and then not bother her again. I still wanted to give her confirmation. So, as I slowly walked again through the party areas, I noticed no one was making eye contact with me or even acknowledging my presence. You would think that if everyone at a party had known about the death, it would have been a conversation or at least some interest. I walked over to the front door and turned to look back at the party stuck in a time capsule and closed the massive front door behind me. Driving away, I couldn't help but think of the strange day that job was. So bright and sunny outside, and I wonder how many of those people knew we had just cleaned up remnants of someone's last moments on Earth.